Hello again, welcome to Backstage for the interval. We've just heard the London Symphony Orchestra perform the Rose Lake by Sir Michael Tippett under the baton of Sir Simon Rattle, and I think special note must be given to all of the percussion section, but mostly to David Jackson and Sam Walton on those rototoms at the back. I think you could see what Neil was saying about how much yardage they had to cover to create all of those amazing sounds. Really luminescent performance. Now behind me is a lot going on at the moment. The orchestra are coming off and having the well-deserved break, and in a short while hopefully you'll get to see the 39 rototoms are going to be brought off stage and put into a little area we have over there. So you might get to see that happening in a short while. The second half of today's concert is Mahler's controversial 10th Symphony. Now this is controversial because it was left unfinished by Mahler at the time of his death in 1911. He left us with 2 completed movements that were practically completely orchestrated, and then 3 sketches which got sort of more sketchy as they went along. And I'm aware, as I say this, that I am right in front of Sir Simon Rattle's dressing room there, and he completely disagrees with what I'm saying. He told us his opinion on the unfinishedness or not of the symphony in this short film.
Mahler's 10th Symphony was written from beginning to end by Mahler. We have every single bar. We have 2.5 movements orchestrated, and we have the rest of the piece in a short score with incredible detail, often on 4 lines. Very occasionally, and particularly when something repeats, there is only a melody line with a few bass notes. But we have Mahler from beginning to end, and vintage Mahler at that. I'm going out on a limb here, possibly his profoundest and most moving finale. And I think it would be a tragedy not to perform a piece where there is so much of him. Of course, people have made different versions, but it is mostly to do with orchestration, whether you add, and if you understand that a lot of late Mahler is to do with there being 2 lines or 3 lines with a lot of space in between them, you realize that this music doesn't need much filling up. It needs clothing. And of course, he would have clothed it in his incomparable colors. What Deryck Cooke and my old mentor Bertolt Goldschmidt did, and Colin and David Matthews, is a gift beyond price. But no one would pretend that it is exactly how Mahler would have clothed his own music. But you can sit with these sketches, which are now available in beautiful printing and are indeed underneath the score. You can sit and you can play one of the great symphonies from start to finish on the piano. So it's been so much of a part of my family for so many years. I get angry when people say he didn't complete it, because this is very different from these other unfinished pieces, or Berg's Lulu, or it was so many other pieces. This has Mahler's whole line, and when you see it, he worked in such a different way. You can tell that he was leaving it there so that someone could finally put it together. And it tells us so much about where Mahler was going, what he was thinking. He was 51, he was a young man. The first movement absolutely seems to discover Berg, particularly the world of Lulu. The second world is Hindemith in the 1920s. The last movement is God knows what. Such a farewell, and such strangeness and such sadness. He watched from a window on a rainy day in New York a fireman's funeral. And at this time, the fireman's funeral, there was no music, there was just a drum. And he heard just simply the beat of the drum from a distance. This is how the last movement starts, with its big tuba solo and these terrifying, distant drum beats. And he uses it to make a farewell to the world and a farewell to the symphony. And there's a type of transcendence which even his music, extraordinary as it was before, had never reached. It's an entirely new emotion at the end of the piece. And these last bars of saying, really, leb vol, leb vol. That's really a masterpiece. Has been one of the great privileges of my life to have been involved with it and to help it come to birth. And what Bertolt Goldschmidt said to me at the end of his life, he said, "Oh no, it's so wonderful that your generation, who had not grown up with the idea that there was an incomplete symphony that shouldn't be touched, that your generation took this and has moved it forward."
So I'm now joined by one of the people who helped put this piece back together, Colin Matthews. Hello, Colin.
Hello.
So how did this fall to you? You must have been quite young when this was
I was very
being...
young. I heard the first incomplete performance in 1960, became obsessed with it and got in touch with Deryck Cooke while I was still at school.
Right.
And he was incredibly welcoming. Instead of sort of saying, you know, who are you, what are you doing? I had some suggestions and corrections, and I helped with the first performance in 1964, the first complete performance. And then, together with my brother as well, we worked on it for nearly 10 years, just going through every bar, scrupulously, just covering the whole thing.
And what kind of problems were there at the beginning?
The problems, well, the initial problems are just deciphering the manuscript. I mean, the extraordinary thing is that this is a complete work. There isn't a missing bar. It's not like any other unfinished works. Obviously, Mahler would have done a huge amount of work on it himself, but this was all assembled in a few weeks in the summer of 1910 while he was preparing the first performance of the Eighth Symphony. So, you know, it's very sketchy. It needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of careful deciphering. Even now we find things. In fact, tonight we have about 20 things which I've discovered in the last couple of years which have never been heard before. Very small. But it's wonderful to be able to continue to work on this piece and to have Simon doing it. He's so committed. He's been committed right from his days with the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra.
So I was going to ask you if this is definitive. It isn't.
It'll never be definitive. What it is as near as we can get to what Mahler left. And Deryck Cooke was obsessive about saying this is not Mahler's 10th Symphony. It's a performing version of the draft as he left it at his death.
Right, so I understand you have a slightly controversial take on the idea of this being a farewell.
Well, Mahler didn't intend to die.
No.
And I think if he changed his normal procedure, normally he would have worked on the 10th in the last winter of his life, 1910 to 11. Instead, he went back to the 9th and made a revision, and I think left the sketches for the 10th back in Austria. And would then have worked on it in the summer, which of course never happened. But I see no reason why he wouldn't have been thinking of his 11th symphony. He was looking at the future as beyond New York. And there are new things in it. And ultimately it's music of love. I mean, the words of love to his wife written over the final bars.
I think that's a great moment to bring in our next guest, which is Marina Mahler, who is the granddaughter of Mahler. So are you agreeing with this? It's not a farewell?
No, I think it's not a farewell, and I've always felt desperate that he did die before finishing it. And I think that it's probably an ongoing discovery. But my first memory of it is my mother telling me that she had persuaded Alma, my grandmother, to let think through Donald, and so to let these sketches be used in such a way, because I know there's a controversy that many conductors won't conduct it and so forth. But I think as it's titled, I think she was right, and Alma right, to give it, because people can go to the original score and see what was there. But I mean, it's so terrible that it was never finished, that one wants to hear something, and I'm grateful to you and to Deryck Cooke and who worked on it and made it possible to hear a complete idea of the symphony.
So you don't have any memories of Mahler himself? You were born decades later.
Would have been amazing. Slightly unreal, but because he died when my mother was 6.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And so you must remember Alma, though, your grandmother,
yes, I
his
remember
wife.
her very well.
So what was she like?
Luminous for a child.
Yeah, yeah. Were you
Because
still a child
beauty.
when she died, or were you?
No, I was a teenager,
Right.
and I have hugely strong memories of her because she had this luminosity. She had, and it doesn't come across in photos. It never came across in all the people who criticized her so energetically after her death, because they couldn't figure out what it was, why. But after all, Mahler loved her, and there were reasons why. Because the things that the men who loved her were doing were those things she found most important in life.
So do you see this as definitive, or are you still?
No,
it's still
I couldn't possibly,
work in
because
progress?
I mean there will always be a young composer who will come and say, I would like to do this again, because it's so tantalizing and it's agonizing at the same time, I would think.
Yeah.
Because one doesn't want to think that such an amazing thing couldn't have been finished. I still find it upsetting.
Did you meet Alma?
No, I didn't. I knew Marina's mother.
Yeah.
Alma, no, she died in 1964, which was just when I was starting to get involved. But I mean, we owe her a huge debt that she changed her mind. Initially, she was persuaded, I think, by Bruno Walter to put a ban on further performances of Deryck's initial version, but then she heard it and changed her mind. Not only changed her mind, but she immediately asked.
Sorry.
It's my mother who pushed her
Yes.
Well,
to change her mind, pushed Alma.
yes, I was going to say exactly
thank
that.
my mother.
Thank heavens
Yes,
that
I
they
have
did.
to say.
Thank you
because
so much
remember
for
she
talking
said-
to us, and I hope you really enjoyed tonight's performance.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, the performing version by Deryck Cooke of Mahler's Symphony coming up after this interval is finished. I should just tell you about our next event, which is on June the 24th and features the music of Shostakovich under the baton of Nazada. So we'll be doing all the usual backstage stuff for that beforehand. I'm just going to take a look and see if, no, we can't show you the rototoms. They would have been over there, but they've already been packed away. So Mahler's Symphony was started in 1910 during the summer vacation, as we've just heard. And then he put it aside to finish revising the 9th Symphony and to continue his conducting duties in New York. He left us with 2 completed movements, movement 1 and 2, and then sketches of the final 3 movements. One of the first decisions Deryck Cooke had to make was what was going to be the order of these 3 final movements. It took 50 years to complete it, and as we've heard, it's still a work in progress. But what we have tonight is we have 5 movements. The first one is soaringly, searingly beautiful. It's mostly given over to the string section, and it has, to my ears, a quintessentially twisty Mahlerian theme within it. It's utterly, utterly beautiful, and I think it's the reason why we should play this whole symphony. Towards the end, there's a scream of anguish from the trumpets. We don't know what that means. Maybe that's him crying out to Alma. Then we have the first of 2 scherzos, and this one has constantly changing time signatures, so it's very, very difficult. Sir Simon will be conducting it from memory, which is quite a feat, and what you're left with is a kind of grotesque dance. The middle movement is called Purgatory, and it's a brief vignette between moments of bleakness and moments that are much more carefree. Then we have the second of the 2 scherzos, so we've got a kind of symmetrical shapes. Scherzos are 2 and 4, and the 4th movement scherzo, in the score, Mahler wrote "The devil is dancing with me," which is a lovely little hint to what he was thinking about. And then we go into the final movement, which starts with this famous muffled drum. Now, Alma said that the muffled drum came to him when he saw a procession of firemen going towards a fireman's funeral on the streets of New York. All that they were accompanied by was the sound of a distant drum, and that made its way into this symphony. However, just looking around, other people say that it's nothing to do with that. It's actually Mahler's sense of loss at the thought that Alma was being unfaithful to him, because at this point in her life, sadly, she was. Whatever, that muffled drum continues into the final movement as we start to get reflections of what's gone before. And we hear the beautiful tune from the very beginning given over to the French horns, and the cry of anguish becomes a slightly mellower, dissonant chord. On the last page of the score, Mahler wrote, "Farewell, farewell, my Alma." And you can make of that whatever you will, because as we've heard, this is still very much a piece that requires discussion and more thought. So that's coming up after this interval is over in just a few minutes here on YouTube. I hope you've enjoyed tonight, and I will see you again on June the 24th for Shostakovich. Goodbye.